On the tip of my finger, you might not be able to see it very well, but I have a tomato seed. And in this hand, I have an iPhone. Now, if I ask you which one has better technology, which one is more sophisticated technology, what would your answer be? Would you be surprised to find out that this seed has far superior technology to the iPhone? That's what I'm going to show you in a minute. But I want to ask you, would you believe it if I told you that your iPhone came about by natural processes, that everything that was required to make this was able to form itself just by time and chance and natural selection? If you would not, then why would you believe that a seed which has far greater technology and much more sophisticated would be able to form itself by time, chance, and natural selection? So let's just do a little comparison. And by the way, when I finish sharing my evidence against the evolution of seeds, anybody is welcome to join and share your disagreement or share evidence for evolution in whatever topic you want. The truth is, evolution is false. It is demonstrably false through scientific observations. And so I welcome anyone to come and share their evidence for evolution, and we'll see how it compares to what I'm going to show you right now. So, iPhone versus tomato seed. Now, when we're talking about data storage capacity, the latest iPhone has the potential for a terabyte of data storage. Now, how does that compare to the tomato seed? Well, this was very difficult to estimate. So, this is a very rough estimate. But the rough estimate that I came up with is 1,570 terabytes of data storage capacity in a single seed. Now, the reason it's rough is because there is no estimate of or exact number of cells that we know are in a tomato seed. So I couldn't find that number. So that's why the estimate is very rough. But even if the estimate is greatly off, it's going to, the data storage capacity in a seed is much more than an iPhone. And so how did I get this number? Well, inside one tomato seed is DNA that's about 90 million base pairs long. So if I say each base pair is a byte of information, then that's 900 megabytes for the DNA in each cell. So it's now, there may be more data stored in an iPhone because the data inside each cell is the same for the tomato. But in a way, that's very interesting that from only that 900 megabytes, we're able to get all of what is necessary for making the machines that go into doing all the amazing functions inside a tomato plant. So let's do the next comparison. So in an iPhone, there's about 19 billion transistors that are just doing billions of what is the word I'm looking for? Oh my gosh. Well, billions of what's the word I'm looking for? It's like it starts with a C. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, uh, of computations per second. That's probably not the best word, but anyway, compare that to the tomato seed. It's 7 to 10 quadrillion protein machines in a tomato seed. It's crazy. And I just want to give you an example of a couple of those protein machines because people sometimes don't even realize what we're talking about. So check out this. This is a kinesin walking. I'm calling it walking, but that's really what it looks like. Going across a self-building microtubule bridge. So this kinesin is transporting materials from one area of the cell to another area of the cell. And it's able to carry these gigantic uh, things that need to be transported, and it knows its job. And now we're looking at ATP synthase, which is the machine for powering the cell. So this is, if you can just look at, absolutely fantastic machine that is needed for life. And so this is what is helping power. And so if you think about these types of machines inside a tomato seed, and is the capacity for building at least 15,000 different types of these machines. And then when we're talking about, and at least 15,000, we don't even know how many different types of protein machines are in there. And then when the sheer number of those proteins, it's something in the quadrillions. So it's absolutely fantastic to think about what is happening inside a seed for it to bring forth a plant and to reproduce itself. And that brings us to another thing that an iPhone cannot do that a tomato seed can do. It can, an iPhone cannot self-replicate. A tomato seed is going to, from just this tiny little seed, be able to make a plant many times that size and reproduce itself, and as well as providing food for many creatures. So the other things it can do is, an iPhone cannot power itself. An iPhone is not, it has to have a charge from externally. Now, a seed has food inside, and then when it starts to germinate, it begins to use solar power in order to continue to grow and power itself. Now, what is so fantastic about this is that the way that it uses solar power is so much more efficient and so much greater than what we've been able to do with all of our human intelligence, making solar panels and capturing the sun's energy. And we've found a great way to do that. But a living cell doing photosynthesis can do that without wasting anything, just down to the electron. There is no waste. And so this is what this seed is capable of. And then finally, it's capable of self-repair. The iPhone cannot repair itself. The seed, as it grows into a plant, is capable of repairing itself, and inside is capable, even in each cell, of repairing itself in many different ways, and has machinery available to do that. So these are all the ways where the tomato seed is actually far superior in technology to the iPhone. So should you really believe that a seed could evolve by natural processes? What is the actual evidence for that? And that's what I want to look at next. I just picked a tomato seed because I like tomatoes. And then I was like, well, let me look and see what exactly, let me see what the evolutionary story is for tomatoes. And oh, okay, wait, I skipped something, so I'm gonna have to go back to that in a minute. But I looked up the evolutionary story for tomatoes. And so what's interesting, not surprising at all to me, is that tomatoes seem to make a sudden appearance. Wow, surprise, surprise. Just like so many other things, when I've looked into it in evolution, tomatoes just seem to make a sudden appearance. There's no evolutionary story and transitions for tomatoes. So let's look what it says. The Solanaceae, or nightshades, are one of the best studied plant families, yet their evolutionary origins have thus far been relatively obscure. Wow. Okay. Well, so there's no origin of tomatoes. What was interesting, I mean, no origin story truly for tomatoes, but what's interesting is that I looked to find out, okay, well, let's see what the story is here. Evolutionists do these molecular divergence dates. When they don't have something in the fossil record, they try to do these molecular divergence dates where they compare different genomes of what they think are related, things that are related on the evolutionary tree. And so they had come up with a molecular divergence date for tomatillos, which are, you know, very much like a tomato, tomatillos at 7 to 9 million years ago. That's when they said that tomatillos had diverged. Well, then in 2017, lo and behold, we found a tomatillo fossil. And the tomatillo fossil is dated at the evolutionary dating of 52 million years old. So this gives you a clue about how the evolutionary storytelling goes. Prior to finding this fossil, it, people would say, oh, well, see, we know from the molecular divergence dates. And if you challenge that at all, they would be like, you're not being scientific. We scientists know this. But then we find that something that contradicts that, right? And so this is the kind of storytelling that goes along with, all of these histories of these various things. And I just wanted to remind people of the 4 scientific reasons that I've been sharing to reject evolution. And there are more, by the way. In fact, one of them I would say that I don't even have on this list is the fossil record, because people have the idea that in the fossil record, there's this gradual appearance of all these forms and all these transitional forms. There are some things that could be considered transitional, but by and large, we have the sudden appearance of forms. And that's what we see with this tomato stuff. So now at 52 million years ago, we had the sudden appearance of a tomatillo. So no history there. And that was totally unexpected. We weren't expecting that to be seen. It was, 40 million years off of what was estimated for when tomatillos came around. So, but the 4 scientific reasons that I like to remind people about for rejecting evolution: number 1, proposed mechanisms for evolution are grossly insufficient for producing the diversity of life on Earth today. Number 2, mutations are supposed to be the main driver of this. This is how we get the diversity, but mutations have been consistently shown to degrade organisms. They have not been shown to have the capacity to build new systems, new organs, new features that are needed if we're going to get the diversity of life on Earth today. Number 3, and this is highlighted, I made it bigger because this is the one I'm talking about when it comes to the evolution of seeds. Seeds are integrated systems. I already showed you several of the little molecular machines that are inside of a single seed. And this is, these integrated systems require foresight and planning. This is not something that you can get about by a step-by-step process. There are many processes going on that have to be thought about, that have to be considered and put in place, organized. Now, number 4 is numerous chicken and egg problems at the cell and system level. And we could totally go into that with seeds as well, because you have to have things in place simultaneously. So it becomes a problem of which came first, this or that. And we could have, for any organism, we could name multitudes of chicken and egg problems that exist with every organism. So these are very good reasons to completely reject evolution and realize that it is false. It is being spread by intellectual bullying and a lot of people who have been convinced, sincerely convinced. I'm not even saying that they're being dishonest. They are being sincere. They truly believe that this is true. They believe in evolution as an absolute fact, but the scientific observations contradict that. So, but what about the evolution of seeds themselves? Okay, we have the sudden appearance of tomatoes, so we don't have the evolution of tomatoes. But what about evolution of seeds. Let's look at that. Let's see what the evidence, a lot of people say, yeah, well, we've found evidence that seeds have evolved. Have we? Have we found evidence for seed evolution that is so great that it would cause you to believe that this iPhone, which has less technology, that you would believe that this seed, which has greater technology than this iPhone, came about by natural processes? I think the evidence is going to be lacking, but I'll let you decide. So this is a paper I found. It's a review paper, The Evolution of Seeds. And it discusses quite a bit about the evolution of seeds because, of course, there's a lot of aspects that you would have to get to evolve. You'd have to get a lot of things to evolve. You'd have to get the evolution of dormancy, the ability for a seed to stay dormant and be able to spring to life later, which isn't that amazing? Like, that is amazing. We have seeds that we have found that are like thousands of years old, and we've been able to sprout them. So the technology to be able to make something that can pop to life and reproduce itself, produce a plant and reproduce itself after a couple thousand years of sitting around, that's amazing technology. So you'd have to have the evolution of dormancy. You'd have to have the evolution and function of the endosperm tissue, which is discussed here. Early seed-like structures and the transition to seeds is the part that we're going to discuss together. I don't want to go through this entire paper because it is too long. Seed size evolution, but the point that I'm wanted to focus on is, how did we get seeds according to the evolutionary story? So let's look at the early seed-like structures, and what they say is the transition to seeds. And Wesley says, but Rebekah, smartphones don't reproduce. Exactly. And that's another reason that they are inferior. But that doesn't mean that, a lot of people will say that. They'll be like, well, you can't compare a living system to basically a machine that we built. This is made out of metal and stuff, and this is all that organic stuff. Yes, but it's actually much harder to build a seed than it is. We cannot build a seed. Did you know that? It's not easy to get these things to come together. The chemicals involved in making a seed do not want to come together. We cannot even make a seed. So it's much easier to form together parts of metal and get them to do something than to get this to come about. So we can't even produce that. Okay, but it came about by natural processes, supposedly. Well, why don't we actually have some evidence for that before we believe it and teach it? So this is the section that's the early seed-like structures and the transition to seeds. Now, I'm going to read this, and I'm just going to go through it, and it's going to be a lot of big words that maybe some people don't know. I'm probably going to pronounce them wrong, but let's just read it, and then I'm going to break it down for you, okay? So it says, the origin and evolution of the seed habit is a fascinating story that started in the late Devonian 370 million years ago. Now, I have it highlighted in pink whenever it's evolutionary storytelling, and I try to highlight in green when it is actual science. But it's sometimes hard to separate those, but I did my best. All right, so I like it that at least they admit it's a story. Okay, so the story, although they proclaim it to be a true story, but all right. 3 major evolutionary trends were important for the transition from progymnosperms and to seed plants. The evolution from homospory to heterospory, meaning the production of specialized haploid female-like megaspores and male-like microspores. The evolution of the integuments and the evolution of pollen-receiving structures. This includes the transition to water independence of the pollination process. Okay, so they've identified the things that are going to be needed in this transitional thing, okay? And now they're going to give their evidence for that. So here's their evidence. The earliest seed plants emerged in the late Devonian from a paraphyletic group termed progymnosperms. Progymnosperm fossils show vegetative structures typical for seed plants combined with phytic reproduction. Seed-like structures related to progymnosperms seed plant transition are often not preserved in fossil specimens and or cannot be assigned unambiguously to the fossil specimen. Okay, so I am going to break this down, okay? But one thing I just wanted to note here is that so they have a hard time assigning these, okay? They cannot be unambiguously assigned. All right. Although it produced spores rather than seeds, it exhibited an advanced system of spore production called heterospory. Heterospory, which has probably evolved independently in several lineages, is widely believed to be a precursor to seed reproduction. Okay, I have to stop there. Has probably evolved independently in several lineages. So another example of convergent evolution, which is a contradiction of evolution. Every time you see this, it's when it says it had to evolve independently, you're multiplying the problems for the evolutionary tree, because we should have these, if we all came from a common ancestor, we should have a pretty nice neat tree where we can kind of follow and branch out. Instead, everywhere we've got these contradictions where we have independent evolution of the same forms. Okay, going on. Fossils of paralytic seed ferns exhibit a variety of seed-like structures. The oldest fossil pre-ovules are from the Middle Devonian. Elkinus polymorphs, the okay, I'm really pronouncing that wrong. Sorry. The oldest fossil seed plant is a seed fern from the late Devonian. This suggests that seed plants arose between 385 and 365 million years ago in the time interval separating Rancaria and the earliest known seed plants. The seed forms Elkinia as well as Archaeosperma and Legostoma. Sorry, the words are really small, guys, so I can't even, beyond the pronunciation, I'm having a hard time even seeing the letters when they're in italics. Produced pre-ovules or ovules on sterile structures called cupules. Cupules are cup-like structures that partially enclose the ovule. In these early ovules, the nucellus was surrounded by integumentary tissue consisting of free lobes. These lobes curved inwards at their tips, forming a ring around the apical end. So far, embryos have not been found in Devonian seed fern fossils. Okay, now I tried to break this down, okay, to tell you what that whole page is about. They started out by saying, look, to get to a seed plant, we need to go from progymnosperms, okay? And these are the four things that need to happen. Homospory to heterospory, evolution of integuments, evolution of pollen-receiving structures, and transition to water independence, okay? The evidence they gave us is that there's a plant called Archaeopteris that used heterospory. Now, heterospory means it had like the big female-like spores and little male-like spores. Okay, so basically, instead of just being regular spores, it has a different spores. Okay, so number two, seed ferns produced pre-ovules. Now, people get confused because now what they're going to say is the progression is that we went from ferns, which produce spores, not seeds. Okay. And then we're going to, from that, somehow get to gymnosperms and then angiosperms. And these are supposed to be the progymnosperms. Okay. And they're saying these are seed ferns. Now, this is really kind of, I would say, strange that they called them seed ferns, because it's almost like they're trying to get the evolutionary story to work, because seed ferns are actually just seed bearing plants that are slightly different than maybe a seed we would see today, but they are not ferns. They might have a fern-like frond or like leaves or something like that look more like a fern. But this is their evidence. And to me, it's very weak. So seed, and then they say seed ferns had pollen receiving structures and seed ferns were water independent. So basically, they're giving you an example of a type of plant that has the properties that would be needed. And so here we go. This is kind of showing the evolutionary story that they're presenting. So they're trying to bridge. You've got the angiosperms are over there in the dark green, and we've got to get over there. We've got to make transition. Okay. And then you have the light green or the gymnosperms. And so they're trying to show these progymnosperms and that, as sort of a transitional. But the problem is they're not really, well, you can leave it open to your interpretation to whether or not they are actual transitional and whether they're really showing us a transition. And even them, this is the what they say under their own figure that we just looked at. This is what they say in figure number 1. The precise evolutionary connections between the different gymnosperm groups are unknown, and the ancestors of the angiosperms are unknown. Okay, so in their own figure, even though this is what they're trying to present as the transitional story, they admit that they do not know they cannot make the evolutionary connection here, and they don't have ancestors of angiosperms. So there's nothing really linking these. And actually, this was something known, a problem known in Darwin's time. This is from a letter that Charles Darwin wrote to a friend. He said, "The rapid development, as far as we can judge, of all the higher plants within recent geological times is an abominable mystery." Okay, he knew that this appearance of angiosperms is a huge problem. Even back then, he knew it. And guess what? Nothing has changed. It's still a problem. It's still unknown. Even in the paper, they admit it, that the ancestors of the angiosperms are unknown. So once again, and the angiosperms are the seed-bearing plants, okay, and flowering plants. And we also don't know the evolutionary gymnosperms also have seeds, but slightly different. And we also don't know their evolutionary connection. So they've given some evidence, and you guys can decide for yourselves if what they've given you with showing you some plants, some extinct plants that had some properties of seed-bearing plants, and this also one plant that used heterospory, if that's enough for you to believe that seeds evolved by natural processes, I know it's not enough for me. I don't think it's good evidence at all. In fact, it looks to me like a desperate attempt to put together a story that really shouldn't, is a desperate attempt to keep natural processes as the way that we arrived here. When I think what is obvious when I see a tomato plant, when I look at this tomato seed and I know what this seed is capable of, that if I put this in the ground with a little bit of water, this is going to sprout up and make that. It's going to reproduce itself. It's full of amazing technology. It's full of better technology than my iPhone. And that tells me, I know there was a creator of my iPhone. I know that it took a lot of intelligence to build this. I know it took a lot of intelligence, a great intelligence, to build this seed. This was not something that came about by time, chance, and natural processes. If you disagree, you're welcome to join the stream. Anybody can join and share their evidence for or against evolution. Tell me why you believe it. Why do you believe evolution if you do? when our scientific observations are so strongly against it. Dave says, ask the experts, they'll tell you, or a Google check. There's fossils and DNA evidence, which is very good evidence. Do you have evidence it's something else? If so, what? Well, I do have evidence. I believe that when we do know of something that makes technology that is capable of putting information together into a code like the code that's in DNA, and that is intelligence. Every code that we know about, every form of, information that is able to produce something is done by an intelligence. So I think that should lead us to the conclusion that there is an intelligence behind life. And for me, that intelligence, I believe it is God, that he is the creator of all things. And there is a story, I believe, associated with that. And it starts with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I don't think you can get to that story and believing that story from just scientific observations. So I'm just trying to lead you to see that there is a creator, that you're not a product of natural processes, so that you can be clear-headed when you're searching for the truth about reality, and recognizing that, yeah, there is a creator. Who he is another search to take on. So, Wesley said, don't forget all the regulatory systems that monitor and when and where a seed is able to grow. Mehershad said, it's worth pointing out that seed germination and development requires intricate circuits of the gene regulatory network, something similar to circuits of the transistor in the iPhone. Yes, thank you so much. That's awesome. I appreciate your comments. And Roya said, science is advancing so much that people no longer get sick. Those who were blind and paralyzed are healed. Yes, we've made great advancements in science for healing people. So thank you all for your comments. Does anybody want to join? Because if not, I will probably shut it down. So, but I would love to hear from someone if anybody wants to come on. So Wesley says, I think it's less the case that they think this is evidence for evolution, and more that the evidence is not inconsistent with evolution. I don't know if that makes their problem less or not. Yeah. And so I would say there is something that I think is interesting, and that is, that I would say is one piece of evidence that you could point to in the story of seeds and say, okay, well, this looks more like evolution. And that is that we have certain things in certain layers. So in the lowest layers that we find, which are supposed to be the oldest layers, we only find like spore producing plants. And we don't see angiosperms until the layers that come much, higher up. So that does seem like it could lend to a progression, right? But the problem is that we don't ever see these progressions. Like we see, if this evolution happened gradually over millions and millions of years, we should actually see more transitions than we do the organisms themselves. We should see them on their way, but instead we have sudden appearance of seeds, sudden appearance of wings. So we have sudden appearance of insect wings, sudden appearance of bird wings, sudden appearance of reptile wings. We have so many sudden appearances of mammal wings, like bat wings. So if I didn't already say that, anyway, we have sudden appearances of so many forms, and that doesn't seem like what would match with the evolutionary story. So I think it's a problem. Okay. Dominator says, I'm not the most adept when it comes to biology. However, the uniformitarian model covers up catastrophism, and Darwinian evolution reinforces uniformitarianism. Not to mention, it's based entirely in materialism, a ridiculous concept. Uh, yes. And so thank you for your comments. And, I'm also not the most adept at biology. There's people who could come on right now and just run circles around me with their scientific knowledge. So this is it's not about being an expert in any particular thing, but it's about looking honestly at the evidence and trying to figure out from our scientific observations what is true about reality. And I'm not really sure how to respond to this one about the uniformitarianism. So, yeah, but it's the uniformitarianism has been the prevailing paradigm for quite a long time now, maybe, 200 years. So it's pretty tough because it's deeply embedded in people's thinking. And so when you're approaching these ideas about origins, people are really coming with a lot of baggage, especially if were raised in a Western education system. They are coming with years and years of indoctrination into uniformitarianism, into evolution. So it's really hard to even think about anything outside of the evolutionary paradigm. So I realized that this is hard. It's hard for a lot of people to even reconsider their beliefs about that. But one person who really encouraged me, because after a lifelong, I was trying to grab his book, but I don't have it here. After many years of believing and even teaching evolution, Neil Thomas, after he retired, started thinking about it. And he was like, wait a minute, this probably isn't true. And he's written several books on that. One of them is called Taking Leave of Darwin. And I can't remember the name of his other book, but basically he kind of talks about how he came to discover that the scientific evidence for evolution really wasn't there. And so, he's not a particularly religious person. I believe he's agnostic, but he just realized that evolution wasn't true. So nobody's coming on. So I'm just going to quickly go back and say, look, seeds are amazing technology. This is the kind of technology that does not come about by natural processes. At least there's not good evidence that something like this could come about by natural processes. There's no explanation for all those thousands of different types of protein machines at work in a seed. There's no evidence for the evolution of those. And so you have to say that this whole seed and all of those protein machines that are working together in there somehow came about. First of all, the information in the DNA to build them had to come about from somewhere. Then there had to be not only the information, but there had to be a code reader. It's no good to have a DNA code if you don't have a code reader. So there had to be a code reader. And then there had to be machines in place to be able to build those protein machines. And so you've got all of that. And you've got all of these thousands of machines working together in harmony, producing these amazing structures that are capable of, reproducing, powering themselves, repairing themselves, and just, yeah, absolutely amazing. And this all is supposed to have come about without a mind, without anything. Now that goes against our scientific observations. In fact, the idea of life coming about by natural processes, we can't even get the basic chemicals to build nucleotides to come together. We cannot build a cell or anything close to it. Even though we already know the components of a cell, we can't build a cell. And so if right now you're someone who believes life came about by natural processes, you're believing something that goes against our scientific observations. You're actually being anti-scientific. You're continuing to believe something, even though our empirical observations show that this does not happen. So now, of course, that could change. We could find a way that they could come together by natural processes, and then you'd be scientific for believing it. But right now, if you believe that life came about by natural processes, you're actually believing something that goes against science. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Nobody joined. So thank you for your participation, and I hope this was helpful to you. And I put the links in the description to a wonderful talk on technology of plants from the Discovery Institute from their last conference. And so I recommend checking that out if you want more information about how amazing plants are. Take care and good night.